Good afternoon and welcome back to your afternoon 5-State Farm Report. Danielle Drotzman, your host here for 570 WNAX. Hope you guys are all having a great Tuesday so far, and thanks for tuning in. Well, as we kick off your program here today, we have a special guest we're excited to welcome on. Visiting here today with AJ Tarpoff. He is a Kansas State Extension beef veterinarian. Well, AJ, we're excited to get you on WNAX today. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a pleasure to be on today.
Absolutely. Well, we're excited to get you on and talk a little bit about heat stress, as that's kind of a timely thing right now. You know, we are in for a few weeks of heat, and we kind of have already seen a few weeks of heat as through July. So I'm sure this kind of raises a lot of concern for livestock and especially in feedlot cattle. So I guess just any specific tips right off the top of your head, I guess, to helping those feedlot cattle kind of stay cool.
Right. So heat stress, I mean, 'tis the season, and it is costly for our industry. I mean, if we don't have the great up-to-date information on how much it truly costs our industry, but some conservative estimates can be upwards to $650 to $700 million just in losses to the U.S. cattle industry due to heat stress. And that's reduced intake, reduced performance, and I know cattle producers are seeing that reduction in feed intake and their reduced performance and some of that increased stress right now. So having a pre-plan in place and executing that plan to the best of your ability is very important this time of year. If we get behind the eight ball on this, it's very difficult to be able to catch up and to be able to help cool these animals. So we can look at heat stress a couple of different ways. One, we know it's stressful, but the more we invest in reducing that cattle stress, the better those animals perform during this time of year. Okay, so for feedlot cattle especially, it's very, very important. And I like to break it down simply, and then some things that take a little bit more investment. I get back to the basics whenever we're talking about heat stress mitigation: feed and water. Now, when we talk about feeding cattle, obviously we're trying to maximize performance. However, we've recently done some work here at Kansas State University looking at timing of feeding. And for those feedlots that are feeding once or twice or even 3 times a day, modifying some of those feeding times and making sure that we're delivering feed later in the afternoon, at least for the bigger amounts of consumption, where they consume that feed in the overnight hours. So that's one piece that just about anybody can try to manage around within your own work environment. The idea behind that is it takes energy, and cattle produce heat whenever they digest feedstuffs. And if we want to kind of disperse and try to spread out some of the heat production and heat absorption in our feedlot cattle, we can move that heated digestion into later afternoon and overnight hours when those cattle have cooling temperatures. So that's one piece that we can do, and just realize that it takes about 6 hours for cattle to dissipate heat in the overnight hours. So if we're feeding later in the afternoon, there's still plenty of time, or if we're feeding in the evening hours, there's still plenty of time to be able to dissipate the heat that they've absorbed during the day. So feed timing modification is number one. Number two is water, and I probably should have had water as number one because it is the most important nutrient. Now, water, it's both availability and flow. Especially for our feedlot cattle, they consume the vast majority of their water between noon and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So making sure we have plenty of access for our larger feedlot cattle and our near-finished animals can be challenging at times. If you're seeing bunching around the water tank where they're competing to be able to get enough water, just keep in mind that an easy investment is to put some portable tanks into your feedlot pens to make sure that we can either double or even triple some of our water access points to make sure that they are consuming the water they need when they need it.
And besides feed and water, what else can we do when it comes to their environment?
Other things that I know a lot of producers are very well equipped for that we do in different times of the year, like during the winter, but bedding. I think we overlook bedding as a very useful tool during the summer months. When we look at heat stress, yes, it's temperature and humidity, but it's also solar radiation and wind speed. So that solar radiation piece, anybody that's walked across a parking lot in the middle of summer absolutely knows that asphalt absorbs a lot of heat, and you can feel that heat up through your boots. But in that feedlot pen, if we walk across that pen, you feel the heat being absorbed on that dirt floor as well. That dirt floor can get upwards to 140 degrees. That's 140 during the peak heat of the day. But sprinkling out and being able to spread some wheat straw, some barley straw, something along those lines, to be able to provide a reflective surface where that dirt and that soil doesn't absorb as much of that solar radiation, we can reduce that pen floor and the ambient temperature of the pen by upwards to 25 degrees. Again, yes, it's an investment in spreading. It takes time and labor, but being proactive and being able to get in those pens, sprinkle out some hay before those heat stress scenarios can be very helpful to reduce the overall temperature in those pens.
You know, I've also heard a lot of mixed feelings about sprinklers. What's your thoughts on that?
There's often a lot of misperceptions and confusion about is sprinkler systems. So sprinkling systems, you think, oh, okay, well, if we water the pen or water the cattle, that should help, right? Unfortunately, most of our sprinkler systems in the U.S. cattle industry for feedlots probably aren't adequate enough to be able to do what we think it should. So what can happen is we can get pen microclimates where if we're sprinkling either at the wrong time of day or too much, or we have too fine of mist, we can actually increase humidity at the pen level, which is very detrimental to those cattle. So some kind of do's and don'ts with sprinklers. If you're going to use a sprinkler system, the idea is we're not cooling cattle directly with those sprinklers, but what we are doing is using evaporative cooling of the pen floor. So we can use those in the late evening hours or overnight hours to be able to wet the pen floor. And if we have low humidity, we get evaporative cooling. As that water evaporates, it cools the entire environment. But using those in the peak heat of the day can actually be very detrimental because we increase the humidity when we have maximum amount of solar radiation and heat in the environment. So spreading that to the overnight hours, big water droplets, and making sure that we get dissipation of the pen floor. And I guess it's a way to think that we're not cooling cattle, we're actually cooling the pen floor when we're using sprinklers. And then last but not least for environment, I guess it's twofold. One, we want to increase wind and breeze flow through. So if you have wind fences and things like that you're trying to reduce some of the wintertime feeding stressors, we want to open it up as much as possible. So whether that's creating mounds in your pen so cattle have the opportunity to get different breezes at different elevations. It's amazing what an 8-foot mound in the middle of a pen can do where cattle can access some of those breezes that are just above the pen floor. Or we can do bigger investments such as shade. We've done a series of shade studies here at Kansas State University looking at shade as a way to be able to reduce the stress, improve cattle comfort, and improve performance during the summer months. And time after time, whenever we're looking at some of these heat stress scenarios, we can do a number of different things with shade, but it's very consistent that we improve performance, increase body weight, average daily gain, increase dry matter intake, but we're also improving efficiency by upwards to 4%. And additive, kind of positive from utilization of shade, and we can actually reduce water needs. So as cattle get heat stress, they will consume and binge drink water to try to, just like us. Whenever we get hot, we drink a lot more water. Cattle are no different. That can put a lot of strain on the system, and if you're hooked up to rural water, that also leads to a lot of excess costs. But by utilizing shade and doing some of these different things, we reduce water needs of those animals, and we can actually reduce some of those water costs on a monthly basis that can really help your bottom line. So shade, making sure we have enough of it. We want shade on the ground of about 25 square feet per head. Okay, that may not seem like a whole lot, but if you think about a 4x8 piece of plywood, it's smaller than that. So we want enough space. We want that shade tall enough that it allows breezes to go underneath. And a good rule of reference is as long as you can fit your loader underneath that shade structure, that should be a good enough height to be able to allow breezes, but we reduce that solar radiation and improve comfort for those animals during the summer. So those are just a few pieces and a few things to keep in mind. You can go big, you can go small, you can make small investments, you can make long-term investments, but all of these are investments in the cattle, investments in your operation, and will improve the comfort and performance long-term in your animals. So use these, pick and choose, but you do have options for producers that are putting together a heat mitigation strategy and a plan to be able to implement this time of year.
All right. And again, that's AJ Tarpoff. He is a Kansas State Extension beef veterinarian, filling us in on some management tips for feedlot cattle during this warm July. With that, we'll take a quick break here. We'll take a look at some ag weather. Then here at the bottom of the hour, we'll take a look at your markets with your Tuesday commodity wraps. So make sure to stay tuned to 570 WNAX.